Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, Kathy. Here we are on End Times Friday, and it's always exciting to catch up on all this stuff that's going on in the world, as well as
good morning. Happy Friday.
Discussions about the different players, in the end, which is always interesting. We've been talking about, as you know, we've been talking about the aspect of the Israeli election.
Yes.
That again, they fell apart, if you remember, and then and when I say fell apart, it means that in Israel, as opposed to the United States, we've talked about this before, but when we elect somebody, whether it's president, congressman, senator, local. Mm-hmm. Whoever gets the most votes wins. Mm-hmm. So let's say, and there was a few years ago, probably some people might remember this, but back in the 90s, Ross Perot.
I remember Ross
Perot, ran as an independent, and nobody got a majority meaning over 50%. Mm-hmm. But the person that won happened to be a Democrat, actually won because they got the most. I think it was like 38, 39, 40% of the vote, because whoever has the most votes wins in our system. Mm-hmm. And by the way, you could have, in which we have, we've had let's say a Democratic president and a Republican Senate and a Democratic House.
Right.
And it means the majority of the people are of that persuasion. So it could wind up being whatever it is by our individual vote. In Israel, they don't do it that way. They're a democracy, so the people vote, but they vote for a party. And if the party doesn't have a majority of the seats, and you need 62 to do that. And it's called the Knesset. So it'd be similar to our Senate.
Okay.
They don't have two houses; they just have one, called the Knesset. You got to have 62 seats to be able to, be able to have power, so to speak. And if you don't, and whoever is the lead vote getter, the party. Mm-hmm. Generally, it's in the 40s, high 30s, 40s. So they got to go get 20 seats. Now, what they do is they say to the head, whoever they are putting up as their prime minister of that party, you got 30 days to put together a coalition. Now, they know what the other vote blocks already are, because they got a certain number of seats already. So that's already been determined by the vote of the people. But now you got to go line up and say, would you join me and support me in my coalition? Usually the top two.
So that the entire 62 seats would be in agreement to working with the president.
No, it's a majority. There's 124.
Oh, okay.
There's 122.
Okay.
So you got to have 62 to provide the majority, because you still got the other 60 or so that may not be up, but that you now rule the government.
Okay.
So you are going to have, no matter what, you're going to have opposition. So generally, the first two are not willing to join each other's coalition.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be easy, obviously, because the first two for sure would be a majority.
Mm-hmm.
But they generally, because we're opposed to each other, I can't surrender to you, and you're not going to surrender to me. So I'm not joining your coalition. So that's out. Okay, so then you go to the number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and see if you can get a majority. And you got 30 days. If you do, you become now the leading party of the government, and you have a government, and you have a coalition.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, and you don't make it, then you go to the system goes to number 2. And okay, you number 1 couldn't do it. Number 2 will give you 30 days to go do it, and then they try to do it. If they do, they become.
Has this ever really worked successfully?
Well, a little bit.
I'm just thinking, like in my lifetime, the stories that I've heard, it has been quite a struggle.
Yeah. Well, except for this last election, the 4 previous to that didn't work.
Right.
Number 1 couldn't do it. Number 2 couldn't do it. And that means then nobody gets there. And you got to have another election.
Right.
And try it again. And they did it 4 times. Nobody could do it, and they had 4 elections in a row. Now, interesting enough, and this is a kind of a peccadillo of the system, whoever was in power at the beginning of all this stays in power, so to speak. So Netanyahu, for example, he was in power when they went into that 4 cycle where they couldn't do it. During that whole time, he remained prime minister.
Okay.
And tried to function with the government, knowing that his party didn't have majority and he couldn't pass a lot of things, but he still could lead, the country. This last election, actually there was number 1 that actually beat Netanyahu's group. In order to form a coalition, he wound up with 7 other parties, factions that joined him and said, "We'll join you."
Okay, that's a lot of groups to represent.
And you're the big shot. You will, and there's an agreement, But okay, so they said yes, and they start functioning. Well, guess what? As we know, we talk about the enemy is kill, steal, and destroy. And one of the big strategies of the enemy is what? Division and selfishness. And so as they started going off, these other guys that were part of the coalition said, "I'll stay in the coalition if you do what I want you to do." And the main party said, "We're not doing that. We're not willing to do that." And so they said, "Then we're out," and they left. When you leave, you make a declaration, you leave, and it took the party seats less than 62. Now you don't have majority. Okay, guess what? Got to have a new election. And that's where we are right now. The election is November 1st. And as of the moment, and this is all by polling, not by any fact, that Netanyahu's group supposedly at the moment, if they said if the election were held today by this poll, Netanyahu's group alone would have 62 votes. Seats, and then he'd be in. That'd be it. If you get majority, you're in. And they think, okay, even if it slips down a little bit, which is likely, he'll get 54, 55. All he's got to get is 6 or 7, and he'll go to a party that will say, "I'll support you." Now it's just 2 parties, not 7. So at the moment, it would appear that Netanyahu's party and then him as prime minister will get back in power.
Right.
And we'll find out. We'll find out November 1st.
And he's been sharing power basically with the other Ben for a while.
Well,
essentially, right?
Yes. Well, he's been out. So the other party actually didn't coalesce with him, and said, we're not going to have anything to do with you. So he's not even been functioning as a official. Before, when he was functioning, there was another Benjamin that was part of his group that was both together. They were supporting, the new thing. So this is a big deal. We got to watch it really carefully. What happens here in the November the 1st will dictate. It appears now either Netanyahu will get a complete majority, which would be a first in a long time, or he doesn't have much to go get another party to join him, and he'll be able to form a government. So it's likely, unless the polls shift dramatically, it's likely that he will be in. Now, by the way, he's a strong proponent of the covenant. Remember, we had that session a couple of times ago, about what Israel's role in the covenant
and the land that God had given them. Yes,
and he's a strong proponent of, I'm not giving up any land because it's God's land gift to us, and I can't just wish it away. And he's super clever, and of course he's protecting Israel from the attack of the extreme Muslims that keep bombing them, and they go after. So he's a very aggressive guy in terms of protecting. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and then how everything lines up, because remember, you got Russia, Iran, and China, and Syria, and Turkey lining up. And remember, in the end, it all comes against Israel to see, what really happens. So it's really interesting information that we're going to start seeing, and we'll see it here November the 1st when they run the election. So
fascinating.
Yeah. And as we've been talking, we've been getting into this concept of the beast, the Antichrist, the false prophet. And let's go back to Revelation 13, just to revisit here. And let's go through it, one more time. Go ahead and read verses 1 to 10, just, first of all.
Sure. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. It was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints.
Yeah. So this is where, as you kind of look through this, remember the beast. As Daniel said it's the system, the new world order that comes up. And remember, it's 10 heads. And then after it's set up, so the beast is set up, it's the system. And it would be, again, just as an example, it would be like New York City that put in a system in order for you to be able to be outside in groups, you had to be vaccinated. So you couldn't attend a restaurant without vaccination. You couldn't attend a show without vaccination. You couldn't go to a movie without vaccination. You couldn't even go to a store without vaccination. Now they could deliver to you, which is how it worked. But the system, which was set up by the government, would be an indicator of, well, that was the beast, because everybody had to conform to that system. It really wasn't resident in the part of a person. Is that clear what the difference is between the beast as a person, the beast as a system? Do you have any?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think as you're describing it, I think that's important to delineate or to differentiate, though, because I think, so many times we put it all together. But I like how you're describing that.
Well, here it kind of morphs together here, so that the system is a one world government headed by 10 heads, and I think it's a corporate structure, not a national structure. It's more of a corporate structure. And they've come together, and we are the leaders of the world. And it's no longer a democracy. So we'll give up our sovereignty relative to voting. It won't be us deciding anything. It'll be the system deciding for us, similar to what happened in New York. So the people, it wasn't like, well, let's vote on it. That was put in place by that New York government.
And they just had to follow it.
And that's the system. And it's not decided by you anymore. It's decided by the system. So there's a system. It's one world government, one currency, how everybody functions. And we know that there's incentive built into it so that there's a willingness to join it, and there's going to be economic benefit to join it. And I think two reasons. One, there's a collapse that causes it in the first place, so that people are.
So that it appears to be a solution.
It's a solution to the problem, and it's a worldwide problem, and it's deep suffering. Supply chain issues. People are struggling, and they come and say, "Okay, we have a solution, and we're going to change your national form of government to a U.S. or a worldwide government that everybody's going to follow," and everybody says, "Yes, I willingly do that, and I stop being a democracy. I stop being a U.S. American system. I follow this new system called the beast." Well, here it says that when John sees it, he says, "I see 7 heads." And still see the 10 horns, so the structure's there. And the beast was fast and powerful, etc. And then the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And one of its heads, as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast. So what happens is during the first 3.5 years, is the system, who is occupied by 10 heads, and Daniel says a little horn, not one of the 10, steps up and gets into leadership, and then he starts to have the authority of the beast, and he starts to be identified as the beast, and it goes from the system to him. And now I'm in charge. And he does it. However he does it is clever, because you think of all the dictators like Hitler and Stalin, Mussolini. How did they all get in power? They did it by
force.
By force. It wasn't willingly accepted. It was by force. And in this scenario, there's a willingness, and however he does it is clever. And it's not seen as a power play. It's seen as, isn't that a good thing? And then he steps up. And then, by the way, he appears to be killed and then resurrected. That's coming, the authority is coming from Satan, who's the dragon. Okay, so what Satan is doing, remember, is what's counterfeiting the Trinity. Okay, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is the true Trinity. He's counterfeiting that and saying, well, I'm God, and my son is the Antichrist, and then we're going to see here another player called the false prophet that joins him. And he did it by going through a deception of a killing of the Antichrist, and then it looks like he's resurrected. So in every way, he's mimicking or counterfeiting what God is, and that's what's giving everybody the thought that, well, I guess this is good. And then he says, He makes war against the saints and to overcome them. And some of them are actually killed. So again, that implies, well, by this verse, there's Christians here.
Right. So you got to think by this verse, you would be saying there's at least an argument for mid-trib or post-trib rapture,
yeah.
right?
Maybe not pre-trib because we're here and we're getting attacked by him. And it's interesting. And think about this, and then we'll come back to this. Why would he attack Christians? I mean, we know the enemy's going to try to do it, but what would be the logic behind it? That, well, I'm going to attack you Christians. What have these believers done that he doesn't like?
Well, everything. I'm not sure what you're going for in this, but they really,
Well, because the world willingly accepts him. Mm-hmm. How does the remnant feel about him?
They reject him. They're still worshiping Christ.
Yeah, see, I reject it up front. Mm-hmm. So even though the world sees it as good, I see it as real. I see it as what's really going on here. And
right.
And this system of one
has
world
discernment
government
and recognizes what's happening.
Behind it, see, I see it already. Behind it is Satan. Mm-hmm. And even though it looks pretty good, and by the way, beneficial to me personally at the moment, I'm going to say no. So these are the remnant who have said, I'm not joining your system. And it's going to be obvious who isn't. So he's going to come after those people. And it'll look like to the rest of the world, you should. Now, we have a little bit of a, let's say, a picture of that. And I've been around groups where there were vaccinated and not vaccinated. And those that are vaccinated, how did sometimes they approach those that were not vaccinated?
Oh, there was definite division and animosity.
And came after them.
But it went both ways.
It went both ways, for sure. But the argument that was made by what's called the vaxxers was, I know better, socially and health-wise, and you are actually causing the world not to succeede because you're choosing.
Yeah, a lot of blame was
blame, and you're not doing what is righteous. Now, usually the people that weren't vaccinated, they weren't trying to persuade, and by the way, sometimes they were, but they weren't trying to persuade everybody. They just said, would you allow me not to? But there was sometimes became, well, you shouldn't be vaccinated because I know better, and then it became division. But it's a picture of there's a rationalization that says I'm for the good, and by you not joining what I know to be good, you're bad. And I'm coming after you.
And honestly, don't you think we see that in everything right now, though? And that's part of the good appearing evil and evil appearing good. But you can't even have real conversations with people and have a differing opinion on something, because if you are for the good of people, if you're truly for loving people, then you're going to accept this agenda, or you're going, it seems like that is on every real political issue there is. There is one side who thinks they absolutely are doing what is absolutely right, and that the other side is doing what's wrong for the country, or vice versa.
Right, that's right.
So it's interesting how the enemy just plays with that division.
Yeah, and it makes it stronger and stronger and stronger.
Yes.
So that as you think about believers who are going to face this at the time of the tribulation, think about what's critical for believers to be ready for and to practice. See, it's discernment.
Discernment and truly being content with seeking God's will and approval of God and God's will, and not seeking approval of man.
Okay.
You cannot get your value or identity or orders from man. It's got to be from God.
Okay, so if you're going to be prepared to follow God in a very, very critical moment, what would be important today?
You need to learn how to hear his voice.
You got to learn that today.
So
you got
that
to practice
you can follow him. Yes.
You got to practice it now, so that he says, my sheep know my voice. And we got to know his voice, because there's going to be lots of voices that's going to be on the other side trying to persuade you that you need to be doing this. Isn't this a good thing? Because remember, the primary motivation and statement is this is really, really good, including, we're going to see here next time, the false prophet, who's a believer, appears to be a believer, is promoting it. So you're going to have Christians who are going to say this is a good thing.
And if you're not discerning and listening and seeking God yourself, and you're letting someone else do that for you, you're going to more easily fall into the deception of the false prophet, for sure.
And to have clarity. So, like, for example, even there were a lot of people that said, well, that vaccine card, that's probably the mark of the beast. And it was like, no. No, that's not something yet that is set up that way, and it's actually that can be viewed differently, and that isn't. So don't promote that. And it takes, on both sides of it, it takes discernment, so that as we get into this, and we're going to get into the false prophet and the mark of the beast, and specifically what it means to us who are part of the remnant, is lots of sensitivity, lots of discernment, and think about, with all that going on, the key, which is true in all of our lives today, is hear from God. Yes.
And just abiding and seeking him and listening.
Don't presume anything. Don't make your own way and think, I know. It's everything learned to hear from God. He'll give you discernment and his will. And if we get good at it, when it becomes really critical, which obviously life is critical already, we'll have the strength and the understanding of how to follow, and that's what we'll get into next time.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Very interesting and great to point out, and a great reminder to everyone that this is the time to be practicing hearing his voice and to be tuning in, for sure. So,
and then
thanks for sharing. Go ahead.
Watching the Israeli election coming up.
Oh, yes.
In, another month or so that'll be interesting.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you everyone for joining us. If you have questions that this has raised, send them in at questions@afjministry.com, and we will be sure to bring them up, and hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Amen. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by All for Jesus Living Waters Ministry. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.